Welcome to the Lincoln Center and to the Temenos Academy. And as always, our profound gratitude and thanks to Sir Alan Parker and his staff who so kindly give us the hospitality of their building and work so hard for us. It's a very great pleasure to introduce once again Dr. Elvis Imafidon. Last time Elvis was here, I found myself at the end of his lecture moved to say that we had spent the evening listening to a true philosopher, and I have no doubt at all that we shall have that experience once again. So welcome, Elvis. Elvis Imafidon is a lecturer in the Department of Religions and Philosophies at SOAS and director of the Center for Global and Comparative Philosophy. He's also a research associate in the African Center for Epistemology and the Philosophy of Science at the University of Johannesburg. He's published many books on African thought and philosophy, and I see that most recently, either just out or shortly to be out, is a handbook of African philosophy. Dr. Imafidon is going to speak to us tonight on orality and symbolism as repositories of African knowledge of the self. So he is going to talk about the knowledge, understanding, and philosophy that go beyond written text. I think this is a fascinating and important subject, and I can't wait to hear what Elvis has to say. So welcome, Elvis Imafidon, once more. Thank you.
Thank you, Gravel, as always. It's a pleasure to be here again. The last time I was here was in March last year, I think. Yeah, so it's a pleasure to spend this evening together, having some conversations around knowledge and around personhood or selfhood. And I think that's where I would like to begin my conversation this evening. I said it's a pleasure to be here this evening. So I want to begin with the very word evening, right? Just to showcase how important language is as the house of our notions of reality. I'm originally from the Benin Kingdom in Nigeria, famous for its bronze casting, which are all over the museums in the world. In the Benin Kingdom, often known as Edo State in Nigeria, you have three main languages, right? You have the Edo language, also known as the Benin language, often spelled as B-I-N-I, but more in English, B-E-N-I-N, which is the language spoken in the city where the king resides, the Oba of Benin. And then to the south, you have the Esan language, which is about 80% similarity with the Benin language itself, yeah? So quite similar, few words changed over time because the Esan people, history has it, are named from the very word of the action they took. Esanfwa means they fled, you know? So there was a very, well, there's a cruel king in the 14th century who lost 2 sons in a day and became very angry with everyone. And some of his princes decided to flee to the south. And that's how Esan was formed. So they went with the language, with the Benin language, but now there are a lot of variations, right? And to the northeast, you have the Esako language, right? I'm very fluent in the Esan language and the Benin language itself. Where am I driving at? In the Benin language, the word for evening is Akota. Akota. So if you were doing a translation and you say, what is the right Benin word for evening? It would be Akota. right? And so you translate Akota as evening or evening as Akota. But there is already a strong loss of meaning because, just a moment, I'm not sure. Trying to move it forward, but okay, great. Because Akota literally and originally means let's talk together or coming together for discourse. Ako, it comes from two words. Ako is coming together and Ota is talk or discourse. And when I spoke about this to my contemporaries in Benin, fellow indigenes, I said, oh, we never talked about it that way. Oh, it's true, because we've basically sort of lost that original meaning that Akota actually means let's talk together. Why is it so? Because during the day, people go to farm, they go for trading, they go for their craftsmanship. And in the evening, it's time for people to come together and have discussions, conversations, polemics, rhetorics, People sit in the moonlight. Kids are told stories, in the moonlight. And evening is a thriving time for discourse, after which people go to bed. And I think that goes to show the power of language. Right. And I do like the way the German philosopher Martin Heidegger captures this in his letter on humanism. Martin Heidegger says, language is the house of being. In its home, man dwells. Those who think and those who create with words are the guardians of this home. Their guardianship accomplishes the manifestation of being insofar as they bring the manifestation to language and maintain it in language through their speech or through their writing or through their paintings or other non-verbal ways of language. Nothing that is in reality becomes open to others until we unconceal it or unveil it in language. But I think this is something that African cultures have taken very seriously because there is a lot of preservation of knowledge and information in language, in all its forms, be it names, adages, proverbs, folklore, stories, music. You find lots of ideas just by listening to the language in all its forms. You hear a name, just a name, and it means a lot. It means so much. It tells a story. It sort of provides the idea about reality, about values within that community. But I think that's where, as a philosopher, I'm passionately thinking about how this language is preserved. Should it only be through texts, as we currently now have it in our time? This, in a sense, is the enduring impact of colonization, even in post-colonial Africa. The suppression of language and the loss of meaning. I'm an African philosopher, and you're either in either of two sides. You're either an Anglophone African philosopher or a Francophone African philosopher. So you either write in English or you write in French. And there's a danger in that. I mean, I enjoy writing in English because I want my views to be heard, right? But there is a danger in that if I write without taking care to translate indigenous concepts in ways that they are properly captured in English or in French or in German, whichever language I decide to use to reach my audience. So in my new book project, I'm exploring the idea of linguistic care as decolonization, taking care, of not simply translating English translating Akota as evening, but saying Akota means much more than evening, but it means let's talk together, which I think is very profound. That linguistic care is crucial if we are to preserve these knowledge systems that are captured in language. Another major challenge that indigenous languages within the African spaces would have is not just the use of English or French or German, so the use of non-indigenous languages, but also the form in which they can be presented or preserved, which is in textual forms. Textuality is seen as the storing or transmitting of knowledge in written or textual forms, as opposed to oral or spoken or symbolic forms. In my own discipline, and I think this is the same with linguistics, there's a protracted perennial debate between graphocentrism and phonocentrism, between speech and writing, which comes first, which is superior, and sometimes I'm not sure how we get into these debates that we can't get out of, There's a long-standing debate as to, well, is speech superior to writing, or is writing superior to speech? But I think even more superior to both, even more primordial, is thought. You start with thinking, and then you put that thinking into words, either spoken words or written words, or you symbolize them in different artworks, painting, and so on and so forth. And when I think about my own discipline, I realize that we began with speech. When you think about European philosophy, as we were talking about earlier, it began with speech, with Socrates having conversations on the streets, and dialogues. And that has always been part of how knowledge was produced. I don't think it's a question of superiority. It's more of a question of complementarity, where speech and writing work hand in hand and have always been crucial and important in transmitting and preserving knowledge. So white texts have been imperative in knowledge preservation and knowledge transmission. Orality, symbolism have also been very crucial in doing this, which is why within an African community, a name would be given to someone. It becomes part of the lineage of that family. And whenever you refer back to the name, it gives you this very broad perspective about something, about beauty, about love, about personhood, about reality, about knowledge, and so on and so forth. Just in one name, a story is told, a polemic is preserved in orality, a painting, a carving, and all this becomes sources of knowledge, as we will explore in this talk. So I think the challenge for African knowledge systems today is that we are expected as African scholars to now also preserve our thoughts in written forms. We're expected to write. That's when we produce knowledge, right? Think about my own space in academics. It's the idea of you either publish or you perish. It still remains, you need to write. You need to write. That's how you produce knowledge, But this again would further veil and conceal these other non-textual means of producing knowledge. So what I would like to do in the next minutes is to look at orality and symbolism as non-textual ways in which knowledge has been produced and preserved within African spaces, and show how that particularly helps us understand African notions of the self, of the personhood, and explore African notions of the self in terms of a purposeful life, the inner head of destiny, the relationality of the self, and also facets of what constitutes a meaningful life. So beyond text, orality and symbolism have been very crucial in African knowledge systems. Knowledge in African has always been orally stored and transmitted from generation to generation. Many of us will be familiar with proverbs and adages and names and things like that within African spaces. And we see one of such enactments, someone telling children a story, usually in the evening where gatherings happen. I mean, if you Google African proverbs, you can see many things like this, which are obviously true and very profound as well. It takes a village to raise a child, and if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, which is different from fast, go together. Knowledge is like a garden. If it is not cultivated, it cannot be harvested. One falsehood spoils 1,000 truths, and so on and so forth. In fact, there are so many that I can remember anytime my mom or my dad wants to scold me, they use a proverb, and it sinks because they don't need to say too many things. They just tell you something and you say, "Oh, I know I've messed up," and it sinks, just one proverb. Symbols have also been very crucial in the preservation of knowledge in African spaces, be it as motifs, designs, artworks, carvings, sculptures, and so on and so forth. They are not just work of art, they are not just aesthetically appealing, but they are also repositories of knowledge. And the question is, the focus is how to decipher and interpret those symbols. And in different African traditions, like Akan, Yoruba, Bini, you find so many of these symbols, like the few ones you see there. I remember the last time I was here, I talked about the conjoined crocodile as one of the Adinkra symbol from the Akan people of Ghana. So we'll look at a few of these as well, particularly focusing on the Adire fabric among the Yoruba people of Nigeria, which is the tie and dye, indigo tie and dye fabric in Nigeria. So what is the question of the self exactly? What is selfhood? What is personhood? Who am I? Let me personalize it. Who am I? What gives my life meaning and purpose? What place do I occupy in this grand scheme of things? What gives my life meaning? These are questions relating to an attempt to decipher or understand the self. So the question of selfhood is the search for those conditions or qualities that a being must possess for that being to be a person or for that being to lead a meaningful life. So there are so many beings, right? But at what point do you become a person? A being with value. And it's interesting that not just human beings can become persons. We also have non-human persons, from supernatural forces and beings to even beings we would describe as being subhuman. I'm sure some of us here have pets. Do you treat them simply as animals, or you treat them as persons, non-human persons? And these are questions we can talk about perhaps someday when we look at animal ethics or so. The dominant conception of a person. And Gravel, Hilary, Joseph, we were having a conversation just before we got here. It was the emphasis on rights, as defining of personhood. A person is an autonomous, subjective, self-contained individual defined by their fundamental human rights or fundamental individual rights. So it's like once the system guarantees those rights, then you have your personhood, and that for me is quite scary, that you find your inner being, you find your true self from a social system that guarantees it, which obviously would explain, the fight for rights, fundamental human rights. And in the sense of who am I as an individual separate from the social political system, it's always the idea of an autonomous, self-contained being that has consciousness. So an anatomical body with consciousness. And so that helps you understand why our healthcare, for example, is weaved around this idea of, well, if you can take care of the anatomy and you can take care of the brain process, then the individual is fine. The personhood is guaranteed. But unfortunately, that isn't always the case. One can have perhaps an excellent physical state and mind state and still not be well, still not feel fulfilled, still feel very unhappy, right? So the question of the self is one that has been with humans since they became conscious of themselves. We all ask that question about that at one point or the other in our lives. And so what I want to explore is the knowledge we can draw from non-textual forms in African places, focusing mainly on West Africa, about how they understood the self. I talked about the Benin Kingdom and what they are popular for today, where you have the bronze casting from, and the head statue of Queen Idia, which these carvings and sculptures were looted during the invasion of the Benin Kingdom in 1897. They were very aesthetically appealing, beautiful, well sculpted, but was it all about aesthetics or beauty to the Benin people? What did they represent? What did that symbol of the head represent? Well, the head in many African traditions, be it in Benin Kingdom, among the Yorubas, among Ghanaians, and so on and so forth. And you find so many sculptures and carvings and depiction of the head. The head meant much more than aesthetic value. The artworks are not only aesthetically valuable, but serve as a hermeneutics or interpretation of the self. The head is a symbol of purpose and destiny. And personal identity and the meaningfulness of life are intrinsically connected with the concept of destiny, which is symbolized with the inner head. So the ontology of a person within African traditions is that you have a physical head, but then you also have an inner ontological head. The inner ontological head becomes a defining feature of who you are because it is what carries with you the moment you come into existence, your purpose of life. So rather than finding life's purpose, you rather are endowed with life's purpose as part of your inner head. And so you are existing, trying to live in line or in tune with your inner purpose. It's a sort of self-actualization process. And I'm sure many of us have been in situations where you work so hard to become something, and it doesn't just happen. You know, no matter how you try, it comes with all sort of frustration and pain and anger. And the moment you sort of turn the direction and look somewhere else to find your purpose, you experience this inner peace. You know, it's like, well, this is who I am. You know, it's not because you found your purpose, it's because that's ought to have been your purpose. You only just discovered it. You know, and so because the head plays a significant role in who we are, in defining our selfhood, many traditions in West Africa often had these carvings and sculptures and paintings of the head. So take, for example, the one on your screen. That is the head of the first queen mother of the Benin Kingdom in the 16th century, Queen Idia, who was the mother of the Oba Esigye, or the King Esigye. The king formally inaugurated the position of a queen mother because the mother played a vital role in his ascension as king, because there were a lot of competition and rivalries, but the mother stood by him and made sure he became king. The mother also accompanied him in fighting many wars. She played a very key role in his kingship. And so he officially inaugurated her as the queen mother. The idea of the beautifully sculpted head of Queen Idia showcases a woman who had a purpose and fulfilled it, which is why you find all the Obas or kings of Benin, of the Benin Kingdom, would have their heads sculpted after they have finished their rule. It's like this person had a destiny and fulfilled that destiny. So they don't necessarily need to carve the entire body. The head is significant enough. And you find this in the orality of the people as well, in the names they give. So some of those names, you don't try to pronounce them so you don't cut your tongue, but I will sound them out. And so you have, in Benin, the head is referred to as Uhun, U-H-U-N, and destiny is referred to as Ehi. So you find many names beginning or ending with those two words to showcase the very importance of the inner head. So you have names like Ehinome, which is actually the name of one of my friends. So when I was preparing these talks, I started thinking of names, and it was hard to recollect. So I said, well, what are my friends' native names? And they started coming up, you know. Ehinome means someone who has a good purpose, a good destiny. He meaning destiny, or me means good. Uhomwagu means it is the head that we venerate. It is the head that we acknowledge. And here is not just the physical head, but the inner head. And Ehizogi, it is the destiny that chooses a king. You're born into a place. You don't choose where you are born into. A child born into the royal palace already has the possibility of becoming a king, you know, particularly if it's the first male child. So it is the destiny that chooses a king, and so on and so forth. So you find this fascinating connection between orality and symbolism within the Benin Kingdom. People are doing, craftsmen are making these sculptures, doing these carvings to represent the ideas about the self that they have. This is quite similar to the Yoruba people of Western Nigeria. And I do like the way one Yoruba philosopher, Leke Adeofe, captures the idea of the inner head. In Yoruba, the inner head is called Ori, O-R-O-I. And Leke Adeofe says, Ori provides the needed metaphysical support to our social existence. It helps to make our beliefs, character, and social projects really ours. With Ori, that's the inner head. Our social existence exemplifies a self-actualization process. You're always sort of achieving who you truly are, a process that continues all through life. That is, we know that the social projects we care about are those we ought to care about, not just ones we fortuitously care about. Being able to reflect and self-determine which social existence we want for ourselves is not desirable. It's not trying to find a purpose of our choice within the Yoruba tradition is not desirable. It's not as desirable as knowing which social existence we ought to want, which social existence we ought to pursue. The self-actualization process allows me to recognize a social life as mine. And this is very key, it's at the very heart of the idea of understanding of diversity, difference, the very fact that we all have our destinies that we try to achieve and actualize as life goes on. And so within the Yoruba tradition, that's where you find a lot of head depicting masks, like the one on the screen used during masquerade festivals. You find a lot of carvings of the head as well, bronze carvings of the head as well, and so on and so forth. And this is very crucial, not just for the Yoruba people, or the Benin people, or the Igbo people, or the Akan people, but you find semblances in different traditions in West Africa. Another notion we can learn from the orality and symbolism of West African peoples is that of the relationality of the self. And again, I draw your attention to the symbol I spoke about the last time I was here, perhaps you remember, which is the first one out of the three below, and also the last one in the first row. The conjoined crocodile. And the story is that you have these two crocodiles striving and fighting competitively for food, forgetting that it is going to one belly, that they have a conjoined stomach. So it doesn't matter whose mouth it comes from, you feed in humanity. The very fact that when we unite, even in our differences, we're able to achieve a common humanity. The idea is that who am I cannot be conceived in isolation from others. You need others to survive. You need others to be really and fully human. As Bishop Desmond Tutu would say, the self-sufficient human doesn't exist. And even if he does, he is actually, in fact, subhuman. And that's the idea captured in the Zulu adage, Umuntu, Ugumuntu, Ugabantu, which means a person is a person through other persons. And I think it's one of the simplest ideas of our reality when we think about it. I am because you are. There is no single day from the day we were born that we do not depend on another. Whether it is another that we acknowledge, that we know, that we see, or is one we do not. I recall standing here sometime last year saying, well, we are sitting right here because people are walking, the electricity, the Grevet started by thanking those who graciously allow us use this space, for example. The guy who drove the train, or the lady who drove the bus, we all live in this web of relationship where one cannot define himself or herself without recourse to the other. So my identity, my consciousness, my meaningfulness cannot be defined away from other people. It's actually possible to define me as a person, to achieve my selfhood only when I recognize and acknowledge the role of others in my being or in my life. And this is very crucial in many names you will find in African societies, and many symbols and symbols of unity, of diversity, of strength in togetherness. And we'll see shortly how these also is replicated in fabrics and paintings and so on and so forth. So the idea is that the self as an individual does not only have the individuality, that is your own purpose, which you come to life to find. So it's like you're in a journey, right? However, the self also has a relationality, that is trying to achieve that purpose in unity with others, in relationships with others. So we are not really alone in our pursuit of our purpose, as it were. We have the whole community to help us pursue our destiny. And it's always fascinating for me that that community is not the social, political, human community. It is actually the community of beings. Beings here meaning both human and non-human beings. So an African community of beings will therefore consist of the supreme being, the divinities, the deities, the ancestors, the human beings, and the subhuman beings like plants, animals, rocks, water bodies, all of which have cosmic energies, right? Some of them are already active. Some of them have energies that are passive until you act on them. Then they release that energy. But all of these beings are working together and are in relationship in order for the being of the one to be better, to be made better. So if I'm ill and I pluck some bitter leaves, which if you stayed in Nigeria, it would be a popular leaf that you know used to cure or used for treating malaria and things like that. And then I squeeze the leaves, I am basically emitting the energy that leaves has, that those leaves have. And I'm using it to treat myself. I'm benefiting from having a relationship with that leaf, which explains why you see a herbalist going to the forest to pick leaves and pick stems to make a herb. Sometimes you find them talking to the trees. You know, it's quite symbolic of the fact that we are in relationship, and telling the tree, I'm only taking a few from you. I've been doing a paper on the ontology of waste. When you think about the amount of food that goes to waste, you know, on a daily basis, the amount of pharmaceutical drugs that goes to waste, because as humans, we've become that being that loves to dissect and uproot and gather and keep more than we need, you know. So we can kill 10,000 hens in a day and eat only 4,000 and then throw the rest away, you know. We are not using other beings in a way that is relational. We are simply seeing them as objects that we need to control, because to be honest, humans are the most fearful beings. They're always scared of the future, of tomorrow, what will happen if it's not there. And so I'm using sort of African environmental philosophy to interrogate that, to see why herbalists would go to the bush and pick just what they need at that given time. And if another person comes for the same concoction or herb, they go back and pick what they need, rather than cut the whole tree and drop in the house, you know, because I don't want to go back, or I don't want to ever have shortage of these leaves, you know. So it's a very interesting way to think about our duties to the environment. The very idea of relationality of the self, the idea that we are in relationship with other beings, both human and non-human. And if these beings are crucial to our survival, then we must also recognize and acknowledge our duties to them as well, not just their duties to us. You know, this very strong imbalance between rights and duties today. You know, we always think of what we want and not what we owe to the other. So I would now like to look at fabric designs in West Nigeria, among the Yoruba people, and the kind of knowledge of the self that comes from that. If we look at West Africa generally, in Ghana, in Nigeria, and so on and so forth, Togo, Cote d'Ivoire, we find these beautifully designed fabrics, beautiful colors, beautiful patterns, motifs, and they are not just aesthetically valuable again, rather they are also very much expressing, packed with meaning, to express sort of the meaningfulness and meaninglessness of life. Yeah, just checking my time. It's no, there's no doubt that while growing up, colors in clothes were very important and significant. You don't just wear white or red or black clothes without a purpose. You can't, for example, even till today, I can't attend the funeral rites of a very elderly person putting on a black cloth. It means that I have failed to acknowledge the impact and meaningful life that individual lived. I mean, the very idea, one of the basic and defining quality for a dead to become an ancestor is living to a ripe old age. And when someone who is elderly passes, obviously the idea is that, well, that person has not completely passed, but there's this idea of conservation of energy, that nothing really lives. He's still part of the community as an ancestor. When that person passes, you put on white to show you value the contribution that person has made to the community and the contribution he is about to make, or she is about to make as an ancestor to the community. A very important one that I am always fascinated about, that I'm still doing research about, is the Yoruba Adire, which is what is often called. The Yoruba Adire, Adire meaning tie and dye fabric. I have one, I nearly wore it this morning, but I felt a bit chilly this morning, and so let me just go for the suits. You have some of them you already see in the background in the screen, right? And they are beautiful, right? But it's not just about their beauty. They contain dynamic philosophies of selfhood, personhood, existence. They tell a story about the supernatural, about the facticities of life, about values and reality, and so on. And I say dynamic because these traditions are not stuck in the past. They are very fluid. And I saw a print recently when I was in Lagos that had all sorts of gadgets in it, wires, airplanes, all sort of meshed together to form this very nice motif, yeah? And I was asking, why is it? So yes, it's depicting the reality we now live in, the technological world we now live in. I thought, oh, that's fascinating, I'm still trying to study the sort of traditional indigenous ones and new sort of post-colonial ones, I imagine, There's no end to it. It's very dynamic and fluid. And I just want to look at three of them, three of the designs and what they say about life, about selfhood. The first one is one that is quite common. It's called the circle of life. In Yoruba, Olokoto, the circle of life pattern. And it can be done in different ways. So you see the blue one, the material itself is just huge circles. But in the sort of green one, you see smaller circles of life, and some are very pretty, But it depicts, the circle of life depicts the very idea of cosmic energy, the conservation of cosmic energy, wholeness, rebirth, relationships that exist among beings, this endless flow of cosmic energy that someone dies and joins the ancestral court, and that ancestor, that superhuman person, as it were, then has the power and energy to vitalize and give energy to the life of the unborn. That unborn child comes into the world carrying virtually all the genes, resemblance, and what in science we'll call genetics of the person who died. That is a circle, of life. And so you find names like Babatunde in among the Yoruba people, which means my father has returned. The very idea that, well, the person who passes back, because the resemblance is so much, not just in physique, but also in attitude. And I remember telling the story here of my own child, who is Elliot, who is a carbon copy of my dad, having the same birthmark and everything, which for me to date is scary in a sense. So this pattern, when you see someone wear it as a cloth or ties it, it's beautiful, but you also realize this person is acknowledging the circle of life, acknowledging this circular flow of cosmic energy, acknowledging the fact that wholeness can only be achieved from this relationship among beings rather than one individual standing alone. I think that's a very fascinating way to preserve knowledge that you might not find in text, but in non-textual forms. A second one, and I find this very interesting as well as someone who does a lot of work on existentialism, the crossroads pattern, Orita Meta. If you've ever been to Lagos or to Ibadan, you know that there are some very huge, my wife has been doing this, we're just past the driving test, and she complains a lot about the roundabouts, the difficulties of navigating roundabouts in the UK. And you find such roundabouts in Ibadan, in Lagos. You don't know where the direction goes to. It can go to like 8 different places. And such places in the West are called Orita Meta, like crossroads. But more, the significant meaning is the crossroads of life, really. That we do find ourselves in these crossroads. We find it difficult sometimes to navigate life. We struggle. Life becomes a puzzle at some point. We find it hard to make the right choice. But this struggle, this difficulty builds in us resilience, the resilience to fight, to struggle, to keep fighting until we achieve what we need to achieve. And the beauty is that you find the crossroad pattern, and then you find, which I have not spoken about here, the fat lizard pattern, a cloth filled with lizard with swollen tummy, that showing that, well, this person has wealth, has gone through these crossroads and has sort of been able to overcome them. And the last one I will speak about is the circles in boxes, which are also very nice, beautiful prints, often called agbole in Yoruba. So you find these boxes and circles inside. It can come in different designs and styles, but that's always sort of the pattern. And it's, again, reiterates the idea of the relationality of the self, the idea of family, household, community, dwelling together, how safe you can be when you are with family, when you are with people who you love and who love you. You see, it's like there's a fence around you. You're kept safe and protected. So again, relationships are very significant and very crucial if we want to have a meaningful life. So these non-textual forms that we've looked at, the adire, tie fabrics, the head sculptures, proverbs, adages, I think they all point to the fact that non-textual forms of knowledge are very important, and as important as texts in the human search for and in human production of knowledge. I've been raising this question again and again in the last few years about non-textuality of knowledge, because we now live in an age where our so-called texts are facing a crisis of relevance. For us who teach, we know the current challenge that things like ChatGPT and AI is posing, right? We've had a few cases, I have had a few cases where you read very excellently written paragraphs, fascinating, you know, and you read the paragraphs of about 8 lines, and it has nothing to do with the second paragraph, which is also excellently well written. And that is disjuncted from the third one. And you start, you know, something is fishy here, you know, and I think an AI did this one, not a human being, you know, because they are not coherent, you know, and recently a publisher approached me and said, well, we've been playing around with, you know, sort of producing texts on different disciplines and subjects using AI. We've done it with physics, mathematics textbooks, you know, so put in this algorithm and the textbook is out, authored by AI, yeah? Do you think this will work with philosophy? I said, hell no, it won't work with philosophy, because this is thinking. It's not mass, you know. But it's scary that that's the stage we are in, you know, where there is a dehumanization of knowledge production system going on. There's a removal of the human, a detachment from the human. We can go to rest and AI can do it for us. And I was just saying earlier how that really scares me in terms of what happens 30, 40 years from now. We're already, Gravel was saying, we're already lazy skill-wise. We don't do anything anymore. Machines do everything for us. And 30, 40 years from now, we'll be lazy as well, brain-wise, thinking-wise. We can't think, you know, because machines are thinking for us. But I think perhaps it draws our attention to the fact that it is perhaps time to think beyond text, you know, to embrace other forms of knowledge production, to not that we are creating new ways of knowledge production, but we are simply acknowledging what has always been there with us as humans. We've always produced knowledge and stored knowledge, not only in textual forms, but in non-textual forms, such as orality and symbolism. But over time, we've sort of always found ways to say, well, texts are the most important. And if you want to be heard, if it's in oral forms, then put it in textual forms, and then we'll be able to read it and we'll acknowledge it. Perhaps it's time we talk together. We have conversations. We take oral forms of knowledge production, knowledge evaluation, knowledge preservation a bit more seriously. And perhaps we may be able to challenge AI a bit to some extent, I hope so. And I think there's a lot we can learn from African epistemologies in diversifying the ways in which we produce and preserve knowledge. So I think that's it for me. Thank you. And I will say, well, Akota, let's talk.